It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon, with pale sunlight streaming through the dusty windows of Miller's Diner, an old-fashioned spot tucked away on the corner, serving up meatloaf and mashed potatoes since 1956. Time moved slower there. Most of the regulars were elderly folks. Old men who had seen war, old women who often talked about their late husbands, and grandkids who hadn't called in too long. In the back corner, seated alone at a worn leather booth, was Mr. Harold Knox. At 92, he still held himself upright, with sun-weathered skin and neatly trimmed white hair. A decorated former Marine, Harold had fought at Iwo Jima, carrying medals he never bragged about. For him, the past was sacred, not to be boasted, but to be lived by. Every day at exactly noon, Harold ordered his usual turkey sandwich and sat in his usual spot. He always took the first bite slowly, closing his eyes as if savoring a memory. And precisely at 12:15, his black coffee would arrive, not a minute early or late. Every waitress there knew. Right after the first bite, he'd always say with a gentle smile, "That day started like any other." But then the door swung open, and a group of teenagers came in. 4 boys, maybe 17, wearing high school hoodies and carrying themselves with the loud confidence of youth. They plopped into chairs near the counter, ordered burgers and soda, and started talking about video games, TikToks, and throwing out swear words with no regard for anyone nearby. One of them, the tall one with a backwards cap and a single earbud in, scanned the room and landed his eyes on Harold. He nudged his friend, smirking, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Yo, check out that old dude. Probably thinks he's still in Nam." The boys burst out laughing. Their mocking echoed to the quiet diner. Harold didn't say a word. He didn't even lift his head. He just kept chewing slowly, eyes fixed on the air in front of him. But the atmosphere in the diner shifted. The sound of utensils on plates came to a stop. A young waitress behind the counter froze mid-pour. Another patron at a nearby table glanced at the group and shook his head. Everyone was waiting, expecting something. But Harold stayed calm, unmoved, as if the rude laughter hadn't touched him. Or perhaps, after living through fire and blood, such disrespectful words were no more than a passing breeze. What no one in the diner knew, though, was that someone else was about to walk through that door. And the boy in the backwards cap, with his smug look and cocky voice, was about to learn a lesson that life would never let him forget. The laughter from the boys hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown louder, more obnoxious. The rest of the diner's patrons were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Silverware clinked more softly now. Conversations had faded into silence. Linda, the senior waitress who had worked at Miller's Diner for over 30 years, stood behind the counter gripping a coffee pot. Her face was tight with the kind of restrained anger only Southern women of a certain age could master, a blend of politeness and thunder. She narrowed her eyes at the group of teenagers and started walking toward them, determined to put an end to their mockery. But before she could speak, the tall boy with the backwards cap stood up, puffed out his chest, and started to strut back and forth in an exaggerated military march. "10, Hut," he barked, mocking the crispness of a drill sergeant. Sergeant Grandpa reporting for pudding duty. The boys howled. Another boy threw up a lazy salute, barely able to contain his laughter. It was more than just teasing now. It was public humiliation. Linda took a step forward, opening her mouth to intervene. But at that very moment, the bell above the door jingled. The sound stopped everything. The door creaked open, and in stepped a man, older, maybe mid-60s, with a square jaw, silver crew cut, and a frame that spoke of power and years of discipline. He wore a weathered leather jacket, jeans, and combat boots. There was nothing flashy about him, just presence, a quiet authority that turned heads. He stood just inside the doorway, letting his eyes move slowly around the diner. When his gaze landed on the group of teens, something in his expression hardened. The tall boy turned around, still riding the wave of laughter. He saw the man. Grinning, he called out, "Hey, Grandpa, you here for pudding too?" The diner froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Harold, still in the corner booth, finally looked up. His eyes met the man's. The man walked forward, slowly, each step deliberate, like he had marched that way 1,000 times before. He stopped a few feet from the boys and crossed his arms. "You boys think this is funny?" His voice was deep, calm, and steady. There was no yelling, no threats, just gravity. The laughter evaporated. The tall boy shifted, clearly uncomfortable now. "Just messing around," he mumbled. The man stepped closer. "Do you know who that is over there?" he said, nodding toward Harold. They looked over. None of them answered. "That man is Harold Knox, United States Marine, fought at Iwo Jima, held his best friend in his arms while the beach turned red, came home, raised a family, worked 30 years at the mill, never asked for thanks, never asked for applause." The boys were silent now. The man took another step forward, lowering his voice even more. "You get to sit here, in your hoodies and sneakers, laughing without a care, because men like him bled, so you could, and instead of respect, you get a mockery?" The tall boy tried to speak, but couldn't. The man's eyes burned into him. "I'm his son," he said quietly, "and you just insulted my father." A pin could have dropped. Linda stepped back, folded her arms. The entire diner had turned their attention to the scene. Strangers united in shared silence. The tall boy swallowed hard. His face turned red. The others avoided eye contact. And then, without a word, the man turned to Harold, raised his hand in a firm, respectful salute, and said, "Semper Fi, Dad." Harold nodded once. No words were needed. The boys stood frozen, the laughter long gone. They weren't just embarrassed. They were humbled. And maybe, just maybe, they understood. But it wasn't over yet, because the man had one more lesson to teach. And what he said next would stick with those boys for the rest of their lives. It took a second before the silence settled again, thick and uneasy. The man who had just entered didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply stared at the group of teenagers, his steel blue eyes hard and unwavering. Then he started walking. His boots hit the floor with a weight that seemed to echo. Step by step, he moved straight toward the group, not saying a word. The boys, once laughing, now stood uncertain, their cockiness faltering. He stopped directly in front of the tallest one, the one with the backward cap who had made the first crack about Harold. For a moment, nothing was said. Then the man asked, quiet but firm, "What did you just say to that man over there?" The boy looked confused and defensive. It was just a joke, Gramps. Chill." But the man's face didn't soften. His voice, low and sharp, cut through the room. "You made a joke at the expense of a Marine, a 92-year-old man who saw things you'll never understand. That's not a joke. That's disgraceful." The boy tried to shrug it off with a chuckle, but his grandfather didn't budge. "I fought too. Desert Storm. Your great-uncle died in Vietnam. And you mock someone like him?" There was no yelling, no raised fists, just that quiet, relentless tone of a man who had seen discipline, honor, and loss, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. Then the old man took a breath. Calm but commanding, he said, "You will walk over to that man. You will look him in the eye, and you will apologize, not because I said so, but because it's the right damn thing to do." The boy hesitated. His friends were watching. The whole diner was watching. But something about his grandfather's presence left no room for rebellion. He walked, slowly, toward the corner booth. His sneakers scuffed along the floor. Mr. Harold Knox hadn't moved. He still sat with the last bite of sandwich untouched, his eyes watching, quiet. The boy stopped a foot away and lowered his head. His voice barely made it past his lips. "I'm sorry, sir. That was stupid. I didn't mean it." Harold didn't rush his reply. He looked at the boy, studied him for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Respect," he said softly. "That's all we ask." The boy nodded, embarrassed but somehow lighter. He turned and walked back to his grandfather, who gave him one look that said everything. Lesson delivered. As the group left the diner, "Quieter now." The grandfather glanced around the room. He spoke to no one in particular, but his words landed with weight. "You raise boys without teaching them respect, and they grow into men who forget who kept this country standing." Linda, the waitress, came over to Harold. She refilled his coffee without asking. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Harold looked at her, his eyes softer now. He gave her a small smile. "Seen worse," he said. "But that gave me hope." Outside, the wind rustled the faded American flag hanging by the diner's front door. Inside, life went on. Coffee poured, plates clattered, conversations resumed. But in that small moment, something had shifted. One old Marine, one hardened grandfather, and one teenager who had learned that sometimes respect is the most important thing you can give. And in a world that forgets too easily, that diner reminded everyone what it means to remember. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the strength and dignity of the generation that came before us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Here at Old Soldier Story, we honor the voices of veterans, the quiet courage of everyday heroes, and the moments that remind us what respect truly means. New stories every week, real, powerful, and told the way they deserve to be. So pull up a chair, pour a hot cup of coffee, and join the family. Subscribe now to Old Soldier Story, because some stories should never be forgotten.